Welcome to a new episode of Outside the Panels with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to the episode of Outside the Panels. I am your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and as you know by now, I am a huge fan of books from certain indie publishers. This time around, I'm getting to talk to two writers from a Scout Comics, Thunder Comics book that's due out later this year in a few weeks. I'm talking to the fantastic Anna Davis and Don Handfield of Eternus fame. Hey, how are you both doing?
Doing great. Great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, doing good, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, more than welcome. You guys have got this book. It's coming out. The Ashcan is out already. It's been out in a few places. The main book's coming out in August. All right. So, what's the story? What's the idea behind Eternus? Help us out if we haven't seen the Ashcan. Anna, you can start us off on that one.
So it's essentially a mythological story about the Greek gods and the way they're trying to get back their power after Zeus's death. And it's a really fun mashup of fantasy and reality. We've done a lot of research on actual political events. And so it tracks not only the Game of Thrones of the gods, but also the way that Christianity and paganism were fighting for control back in the day.
Cool. So whose idea was it to make it historical in kind of nature then? Because I noticed on the credits you've got like a couple of consultants on board to kind of keep the non-J's in line. That threw me on page one. It's like, no J's, I couldn't be in the book. Yeah, Johnny the Machine Hughes doesn't exist. I'd be like, Johnny the Machine Hughes, that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're both huge history nerds, so I think it was just inevitable.
All right, cool. So
Yeah.
how did you guys meet, Don? How did you two kind of get involved? Is it just a history element, or have you worked on books before?
Well, I'm a bit of a history nerd. My dad was a historian, and I had a show on History Channel that I co-created called Nightfall that was about the history of the Knights Templar. And there was a show I was doing right after that. We were running a writer's room, and it was set in the Ottoman Empire. We needed some great writers for that, and Anna was one of the writers that we had in the room, and that was a great room. We wrote some great scripts, and Anna and I got along. We always wanted to find something to work on together. And when Andy Serkis and Andrew Levitas approached us with this idea of doing something in the world of Greek mythology, and this idea, I grew up with Edith Hamilton. I always loved the Greek gods. I always thought they were kind of like the Avengers. And really, I came to Anna and I was like, hey, there's this, this world. And of course, we love Andy Serkis. We love Andrew Levitas. We wanted to work with them. And really, Anna kind of had this idea of the last Christian emperor is in power. The gods, we came with this idea that like the gods, it's sort of like social media, right? The more followers you have, the more power you have. And the gods are losing power, and they're trying to find out who this one god is that's taken all their followers. They each think it's another god, sort of trying to just hang on to power. And these sort of Christian ideals that are coming into this pagan world, this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And these ideals are coming in, which are very much about like forgiveness and turn the other cheek. And at the core, though, what we created was this sort of human drama of, Hercules, who is Zeus's son. And what we find out is that there's the champions are like Medusa and Hercules are champions of the gods. So they're like the right-hand men or women of the gods who kind of help them fight their battles, essentially. And Hercules was on duty. He's sort of like the Secret Service guy who the president got knocked off on.
I can imagine that. Yeah, that'd be cool, wouldn't it?
And he's a drunk. He's just in the gutter, basically. And then, Athena comes to him and is like, hey, we think we know who killed Zeus, your father. And your chance to get him back. And it really has this. So while there's this big Game of Thrones thing going on, it's really this sort of human drama about this guy who's sort of washed up and feels like he failed, who has to take care of this little 8-year-old princess who survived this attack on Athena's temple that they think was done by the murderer of Zeus. So noir story of them trying to solve this murder together, this jaded man, this little girl.
So hold on, I'm going to have to say this. I'm really sorry. All right, but a washed-up warrior and a little girl wandering around. That sounds quite familiar, and from a certain place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Is that just serendipity?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're always all these ideas are knocking around your head,
Yeah.
but when we were conceiving of the story and building out the characters, we knew we wanted a priestess from the Temple of Athena involved, no matter what.
Yeah.
And then Heracles was a natural kind of companion to her, as somebody who has a redemption arc and really wants to prove to his father that he can avenge him. And so it's sort of happenstances in the world building that they came together. So it's not necessarily intentionally I think it's a fun archetype, which is probably why we came up with it. You know,
That's a good shout.
Yeah.
You know what? And I don't mean to be facetious, so please don't take it that. I love comic books, right? And I don't know if you guys are reading comics right now, but if I pick up one book, it's about a multiverse. And if there's one book about a multiverse, there's like 13 books about the multiverse. You know what I'm saying? It's like somebody gets this great idea and it goes pop, 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 pop. And like DC are doing it, Marvel are doing it, Dynamite are doing it. I'm like, oh man.
It's interesting,
I picked up, what did I pick up? I picked up Variants, a Jessica Jones book. It's all about the different versions of Jessica Jones that exist in the multiverse. I'm like, I get it, there's a multiverse. Park that story, move on. You know, it's just kind of that. It's kind of like that. I always am amazed by that kind of kernel story, that kind of central nut, and people just kind of fly off in different directions. I have to say, your direction, I absolutely loved. Seeing Medusa as a good guy, it's kind of like blew my head. I was like, wow, because you always think of her from like the Clash of the Titans type of stuff. Where she's like the bad guy, like in the thrall of doing something evil for evil's sake. So seeing her look out for the little girl in this one was quite surprising. Although I did when the lamb got it, when the goat got it, I was kind of hoping it was the uni from the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, but that's just maybe a little bit too. All right, so you've got Egypt, you've got sorry, not Egypt, you've got Greek gods, you've got a little girl who's been a potential witness to the crime, the death of Zeus. You've got the Game of Thrones politics element in. You've got the idea that you've got to believe in the gods for the gods to have power. Man, that sounds quite. How did you manage to coalesce that? Because that sounds like quite a heavy burden to carry. It's like one of Hercules and his seven tasks, isn't it?
Well,
Go ahead, Anna. Go ahead.
Well, we spent a lot of time on the phone because we wrote this mostly throughout 2021.
All right, okay. Cool.
And just spent hours on the phone going through it, writing it down, rewriting it, and whittling it down to something that was as compelling as possible. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening, and with the gods, there's always a lot of things happening. You can't escape that. But really centering the narrative on this hunt for Zeus and the one god, and making everybody's, I guess, power-hungry goals center on that as well, kind of unifies the story, I think.
Yeah, and you know, we sort of, coming from the film and TV business, Anna and I have sort of been in a room and had to take an idea and make it into 10 episodes. This was like making an idea into 7 episodes. I mean, the thing that I always try to stress, and you know, obviously we're working with Andy Serkis, who's this great storyteller and director, and we're working with Andrew Levitas, who's this great storyteller and director, who are sort of a part of the process. But really, what it came down to, in a lot of ways, is this relationship between Hercules, who's sort of given up on life, and this little girl who's sort of connected to this monster, Medusa, and how they both kind of find each other despite not really wanting each other, and how it becomes this sort of kind of beautiful father-daughter relationship.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to be honest. Because I've been lucky enough to read issue 1 as an advance, and it's very much world building. It's setting the scenes and setting a couple of the kind of, as you say, the archetypes up, ready to roll forward with that. I'm looking forward to like the coalescing, the bringing of those elements together a little bit. How's the because there's different things in play here. You've got Andy Serkis and and the creators who came up with the idea. Then they've got you two writing this. How's it work with having potentially 4 different kind of writers on one book? Who's the take over Ted?
Well, it was actually a great dynamic. I mean, they had this initial concept and this idea and this world they wanted to play in. I think Anna and I both were I was weaned on Edith Hamilton and Clash of the Titans. I love that stuff when I was a kid. What we needed was a new, fresh take, and I think that's where a new, fresh way in, not necessarily take, and that's I think where Anna, very smartly came up with this idea of this last Christian emperor Julian, and then it kind of coalesced from there. And basically, we would, it was like a relationship you'd have with a studio or a director, where you're constantly kind of telling them what you're thinking, and there's a little back and forth, and then you're coming up with with the final narrative. And they were great to work with. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Andy Serkis. I think that's what really excited me to work on this with someone like that, who I just tremendous respect for his work, and he was a joy to work with. Andrew Levitas, who I didn't know before this, but is also an amazing talent in his own right. I mean, he's a fine artist. He does metal work. He's also a professor at university, and he's also a filmmaker. He just did a movie called Minamata with Johnny Depp, and is kind of a really an artist in his own right. So
cool.
The meld of those 4 things, those 4 people together, I think made something really great. I'm really excited for people to read the full arc. It really has a nice sort of movement, and I think, like you said, issue 1, you're laying the pipe, you're getting everything ready, and then the emotional payoff is later in the series. Definitely.
And I think this is a credit to you two, because when you set up a new world, you've got to make it interesting from the get-go, right? Or else people will just flick through next, because there's plenty of books out on the rack. So a credit to you guys. You've created this world that, even if you're not massively into Greek gods, you are very much keeping it at, I don't want to say at a base level, but at an understandable level. You know what I'm saying? Do you remember like the Wonder Woman books from the 80s? It's like, it's Hera this and God this and the other, and you need like an encyclopedia to work out who they're talking to. This is very much, because it's at the demise of Zeus and his brethren.
Yeah.
One, you don't have the cast of the pantheon of gods to deal with.
Yeah.
You've got like maybe 2 or 3, and the ones you've chosen and the characters like Medusa, we recognize them. So I think that was a really wise choice. Well done to the parents for that one. How does the writing dynamic work for you two then? Because is one person more a dialogue person, one guy a plotting person, or do you just kind of mash together and rack up the phone credits and phone charges?
Well, I come up with all the best ideas. So.
Fair point. Well done. Round of applause.
Something we try to do, I've always tried to do in historical stuff, is just come in at what I call the street level, come in at the average Joe level. And I think a lot of times people approach gods in history from this sort of on high way, and we don't really get the view of the man on the street. And we really try to come in at, a level of understanding. And then, the other thing we always try to approach is like, you have these historical events that happened, like Julian won this battle, or Julian actually turned pagan officially, because that wasn't necessarily his background. He was raised by a guy who was pagan and Christian, and he kind of knew both. But at a certain point, he was just like, I'm joining this cult and I'm becoming pagan. And what you try to do then is go in and try to find this emotional reason for that. You try to make it a human reason. And that was part of the fun of this, and one of the things, Anna really was stressing in the beginning, which was part of the sort of what I call the safe cracking of the idea, was this idea that the Roman mystery cults, which I didn't know a lot about prior to this, but these kind of like secret religious sects where you couldn't talk about anything. And there's one really interesting one about the Eleusinian Mysteries, which is this cult where everyone went to this festival once a year. They went into this, cave or temple, and they saw something. And if you talked about it, you were put to death. And he went in, supposedly Julian went into the Eleusinian Mysteries and came out a different dude. So we were like, what happened? And that was kind of the fun of this, because I think what we came up with from a narrative of just logic and storytelling, when we actually dug into the research was actually sort of what people kind of think happened, and so that was a lot of fun. And I won't spoil it here, but
Yeah, no
people wanna
spoilers. Go buy the book. Go buy the book.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's like a fight club. It's like a Greek god fight club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine walking into a room, like what would you see in a room after consuming a hallucinogenic that would change your entire life
Wow.
and make you devote your life to the Greek gods? And that's the question we answer.
Well, mine would have to be Diana of Themyscira would have to be in there somewhere. But that says more about me than it does about anything else. I think I'm sorry about that one.
Well, I mean, maybe that's a new interactive Eternus event that will have the mysteries room in the like they have for Netflix. They have all these events. We'll have the mysteries room. You can drink your little drink and you go in and it shows you your deepest fantasy.
So this is like when you can't be bothered to pick on Netflix and you press the button, show me something, boof. There you go. Click,
Right.
show me. Yeah, that would be cool. That would be cool.
That kind of reminds me of Batman. Batman Forever. He goes in that little thing and then
with the mind thing. Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely. Right. Let's have a look at the book a little bit more. We've got the cover in the background. Got to say the cover is gorgeous.
Yeah, just to talk about the covers for a second, man. We have this artist. His name is Rob Pryor that we were, extremely lucky to get. I mean, he is a guy who he sold a painting at Art Basel last year for $1 million of Virgil Abloh. He's a guy who is this fine artist. His art commands the top prices, and the price since he started has just quintupled. So we were very fortunate to have him be involved, and we're actually doing comic books with him. As a creator, he's a multi-hyphenate talent in story and art and directing and everything else. So we're very excited to have him. But he did these amazing. We have 7, 8 amazing covers this guy did that are sort of wraparound covers that are just gorgeous, man. He's a really. I mean, this is like a.
I would be interested in seeing his interior art. If his cover art looks like that, I'd be interested in seeing what the interior stuff looks like. That is, I don't know. I looked at the cover when I looked at the book earlier. The face screams. I know this sounds really bad, and I'm really sorry about it, but in a good way. It screams like 70s Star Trek. That kind of like really classic look. And then they've got like you've got the snakes coming around, and then I'm absolutely in awe. I was like, this is hands down one of the best covers I've seen all year, and I was like, I was just blown away. I was like, wow. So
Dude, he crushed it, man. It does have this kind of 50s, 60s, 70s kind of classic movie poster vibe, man, that he
definitely
that I just loved, man. Yeah, that whole and
even this snake here, the snake's looking right at you.
Yeah, you don't see that a lot. They don't usually have the snakes checking you out in those things. Yeah, he's brilliant. Little trivia: every painting that Rob does has a chicken hidden somewhere in it. And apparently he was doing a book for, I want to say like Rob Liefeld or someone. And the guy was like, look, I heard you put chickens in the book. And I just want you to know there's no freaking chickens in my book. So Rob was like, I put a chicken on every page. And then it became, so his thing is now there's a chicken in every painting. So we got this blown up big for our display at New York. And the guy who did the printing was like, there's a chicken on here somewhere. And I was like, we were like, oh, cool. So we didn't even know. Rob didn't even tell us. We're like, Rob, there's a chicken on here. He's like, yeah, that's it. In everything I do, there's a chicken. And he told us that story. So
I know that back in the day, Todd McFarlane used to put a Corky the cat.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
On his comic books. And I think
maybe maybe it was McFarlane that hit the chicken in. I don't know. It's somebody you have to have Rob on and have him tell the story. It was someone that he was looking for. So.
That's Rob, your artist. Rob Liefeld doesn't talk to me that much.
Oh, right.
But hey ho. Right. So let's get into this. The artist for the book is, you have to forgive me because I am terrible with names. I'm going with, how do I pronounce this? Carl Malini?
Carl Moline. Yeah, he was an artist. And oddly with Carl, like I went to high school in Northern Virginia and I went to an intermediate school. I think Carl and I went to the same intermediate school basically. And then we went to 2 different high schools, but right next to each other in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC. Did not know each other. We didn't remember each other. I remember reading about him and being like, wow, this guy went to school right next to me. How, we both ended up doing comic books. And I had reached out to him about doing this book, and we just love his art, man. He's such a great storyteller. He really is just a guy who can really capture story. And we have Andy Owens inking most of the issues, so they worked in tandem.
The colors are gorgeous.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
the colors are great.
Pamela Pogali.
Yeah, Pogiali, I think she's.
I'm British. It's hard G's all the way for me. Sorry.
Yeah, me too. I'm from one of the the East Coast, so same thing. It's Gloucester, not Gloucester to me. So yeah, it's she did an amazing job with the colors, and she's just really continued to crush it as we move forward.
Yeah, we've been incredibly blessed with the artists. I mean, Carl, I have to talk about specifically. He does such amazing research and really gets into the story and pulls out little details, whether it's clothing or, if there's a historical figure, he'll look them up and read about them. So if we give him a note, he'll be like, well, actually, and he'll give you like a whole rundown of why he made that choice. And so it really comes across in the way that he draws this. And every time I get a page, I'm so grateful that he's on the team. Everybody's wonderful. I've had a wonderful time working with everybody, but Carl in particular is just blows me away every time.
Yeah, and we have another artist that actually came in for the middle part named Marco Del Forno, who's also really great. And we had another artist I worked with in the past who did the layouts for one of the issues. But we really have these two artists in tandem. Carl started us off. He's going to finish us. And in the middle, we have this other artist who's also great named Marco Del Forno. And the layouts for issue 3 were done by Alex Nascimento, who's another great artist that we were lucky to have on this. So.
The look of the book has an animation style. I feel. Was that something that you guys were looking for, or is that just Carl's natural style to go with that?
Really kind of Carl's style. I mean, we wanted something that could capture the fantasy but also the emotion. I mean, so we have one of the best filmmaker teams around behind this. We have Andy Serkis, who just directed Venom 2, and Andrew Levitas, who's this sort of fine artist and director. And our plan, we hope, is to take this out for film and television. But animation could certainly be one of the ways to go. I mean, we certainly have what Andy does with his ability to animate characters would be amazing in that regard. But I think we also saw this as like a live action kind of Game of Thrones. It could be this sort of TV. Yeah. That's sort of Anna how we met and what we think about. And I always kind of approached, making sure every comic or every episode has what you'd get from a good TV show, the same arc and lift. So
it's funny. And I guess this again, Anna, feel free to weigh in on this. So often I see comic stuff move to movie and TV. Yeah. For me, you guys with your television background, it seems like you're paying back to the comic industry a little bit by creating this for comics. Is that a fair assessment to make? Is that a fair point, or is it just my warped?
No, I mean, how I sort of dragged Anna into comics, and she's just such a natural. She's such a strong female perspective, and really that's what this needed. You're writing about Medusa as a heroine, and she just brings this really fierce, powerful, intelligent female perspective to everything she does, and that's what she brought to the writers' room when we had the show, and that's what she brought to the comic. But as far as how I got into comics, I was making a show in Prague and wanted to develop another show, and I always wanted to do comic books. I always loved comics. I grew up reading them. I was the little latchkey kid who would take $1 out of my mom's purse to go buy a comic book, So I still have like 10, 12 long boxes in my garage of my collection, and really wanted to just, what I found when I did that first comic, which I was fortunate, my first comic was called The Rift. I've probably produced and written, I don't know, probably 6 to 10 series since then, but it was optioned by Steven Spielberg. It was made as part of Amazing Stories, and I got to write the teleplay for it too. And just the way that the freedom of creation you have, and the fact that comics are an end product. And I've spent much of our careers writing blueprints for buildings that never get built. And if you're a
Very
success,
sad.
if you're Aaron Sorkin, you've written screenplays that have never gotten made. So imagine. So we've written all these, and what I love about comic books is they're in the world, they get out there, and the story lives. And you talked about the sort of dynamic between Hercules and the girl, and how there was similar things, or the multiverse gets in it. And there's this idea. There's a great book called what's it by? It's by the woman who did Eat, Pray, Love. But she
Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yeah, Elizabeth Gilbert has this book called. It's about writing. It's about the creative process, and she talks about how if an idea gets into the world, it's like it doesn't just germinate with one person; it germinates with other people, and other people are going to explore it through a different lens. And it actually kind of makes sense. And I think we think we're sort of these individual vessels, but I think we're all connected in ways that we don't fully understand yet. And if you think about the survival of the species, if someone's like, man, I got the idea for the wheel, and then that guy gets dysentery and dies, we're sort of in trouble. So
fair enough. Yeah, that's a fair shout.
The idea of the wheel, and one guy might be lazy, one guy might die of something. There's like three guys, or there's the right and the three other guys that flew.
Yeah.
So,
and one of them was William T. Ford, just sat there making all the money.
exactly.
So, Anna, Don says he pulled you into comic books. What comics are you reading right now?
So obviously, besides this one, which is the best comic I've ever read,
of course it is. Yes,
I am a huge fan of the Cosmonite series by Hannah Templar.
Yeah,
I have really obscure comic tastes, but that is probably my absolute favorite. She's working on issue 2. She's self-published. She draws and colors and writes everything, so it takes forever. And they also just had her and I'm going to forget their names, so I'm just not going to say it, but they released a new book about, and now I'm totally blanking. This is so embarrassing, but it's about a famous historical lesbian comic book writer who became a writer, like a pulp fiction writer, and she wrote Carol. And it's sort of a exploration of her journey from comics to books. And that's kind of what I'm really into as a history nerd is taking these stories of historical figures and watching them like a brief slice in time. Funhouse is another one that I really like. So that's sort of the weird stuff that I'm into. And Don pulled me into it, but I will have to say that I wanted to do comics for a while because I like to write really expensive historical stories that nobody wants to film. And so comics are really the best venue to blow stuff up and kill lots of people and do it on a budget.
What's the special effects budget for this comic? $2.50. Right. Sold. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I always tell people, and the artist, Carl wouldn't want to hear this, but I'm like, it's the same price per page if you have if you're leveling San Francisco or it's just two people talking, and then the artist would be like, don't do that.
You do not want a 12-panel helicopter chase in the middle of my page. Thank you very much.
Exactly.
Yeah. Keep it simps. All right, we're going to take a break for one of our adverts. I don't know where to go, to be fair. Normally I know where to go. I tell you what. Why don't we have a listen to this one? It's short and sweet. It's the Old Timers Comic Book Show. Check it out.
Do you want to find out what makes the professor do his happy dance? Check out the Old Timers Comic Book Show, only on the UCPN.
That's right, the professor in his happy dance, checking out the Old Timers Comic Book Show, where the hosts aren't old, but the comics most certainly are. There you go. If you're into your classic books, go check that out. There's a Star Wars one just dropped recently, and the next one up due next week will be the Patriots. No, not the New England people. Everyone knows I'm a Dolphins fan. Like I have that on the show, really. It's Independence Day, so we get to have some patriotism. There you go. Cool. Right, back to you guys. I'm interested. You mentioned Knights of Templar before, and the historical elements. How long does it take for you to kind of get the research up and running to kind of back up what you want to write about, and how does that actually change the idea? I don't know if we start with you on this one first. I think, how do you, because obviously you talk about Greek mythology, you know, I wasn't there. I know my grey hair looks like I was, but really I wasn't. Right? Don't tell anyone I'm Zeus in disguise, will you? I don't want anyone knocking on the door. Cheers.
Well, we'll put you in a toga first.
Well, hey, it's not the worst thing I've ever worn.
Great during the summer.
Yeah.
For me, historical research is very much kind of like chasing a story, right? I start online always, and I'll Google an idea, right? And then I'll just start reading. And if I find something, and this is how I found the mysteries, because I'd heard of the mysteries, but I hadn't really been interested in them. And I start chasing it down till I find the story, right? Which is, there is an ancient mystery cult with a mystery that has never been solved, and people have been killed. Actual historical figures have been killed to protect the secret. And I'm like, well, that's a story. And where does that go, right? And then what I do is I find other historical facts and just sort of pull it out of that center to make sure that it matches. And that was the original idea that I had sort of pitched to Don was, okay, well, the only way this works is if these, we can kill these people as many times as we need to, because that's interesting to me, that the champions are not one and done. And it also matches with the historical reality that all of these Greek myths change over time, that they're not the same story every single time. And how do you account for that? Well, you account for it by saying it's not the same person. So for me, it's like a combination of, you find the thing that's interesting, that grabs you, and then you find other things that link to it. And in between, you weave the fantasy.
Cool. That's a great way of looking at it. Definitely. Don, do you kind of agree with that? Do you help layer on the fantasy elements between the two historical points?
Yeah, well, Anna loves to kill people. So usually the body count is like, I'm usually going like, Anna, we can't kill that many people. But now,
so Anna's the reason why the goat gets it. Is that what we're saying?
She loves to murder people.
I mean, in case anyone wonders what I'm talking about, there you go. Check it out. The goat gets it.
Yeah, but as far as the lamb gets it pretty quick. The
lamb of the apocalypse.
That's right. but to speak of like and we have very similar approaches. My approach is always like making the historical emotional. So, with Nightfall, the whole premise of that was like, we knew the King of France rounded up the Templars and had them burned at the stake. And so we knew that was a fact. And we also knew that the King of France was close to the Templars. He was like the pallbearer at the head of the Templars' sister's funeral, and they were sort of good friends. And so what happened? And we also knew that the Templars were based on Arthurian mythology, and there's this idea of Guinevere's affair with a knight. And so we took this whole approach into making the King of France emotionally, and making the audience emotionally understand why he would sort of kill these people. And it was kind of the same here. We had this idea of Julian's conversion and what's the emotional aspect of that. And then we had this sort of dynamic of solving this murder and sort of the gods dealing with their own mortality, which I think is something anyone can relate to, that we sort of dug in emotionally. But I'm doing a book right now that's about World War I, and I'm, up all night watching documentaries about World War I, and absolutely influences, the basic plot, the characters, and then you read this historical detail, and absolutely it becomes part of the narrative. And when you can tie the fictional to the non-fictional, that's when the magic happens, and you get really excited.
So, I mean, I'm gonna have to really. I don't know if this is an odd question to ask, but you mentioned Knights of the Templar. We've talked about them a little bit. You can't talk Knights of the Templar without thinking Dan Brown, right? You can't think Greek gods without thinking Wonder Woman, and all the various stories that kind of exist around them already. Do you, as a writing duo, do you take in or any of the sort of the fictional elements that have gone before, or do you just kind of say, you know what, we're all working in the same playground, this is just our interpretation of what could have happened?
Well, with Dan Brown, I mean, he drew off the work of the writers that did the research that they think is based on reality or non-reality or whatever. But the central construct of Dan Brown's sort of whammy, that the Da Vinci Code whammy, that Christ had kids, is amazing. I mean, we did, which Dan Brown sort of popularized that idea. I would not say it was Dan Brown's idea. It was
Well, we all know about,
but he made it. He made it. He brought it to the world, and I love that book. And I think what we did with this, we always kind of described it as it's Da Vinci Code meets Game of Thrones, because what Dan Brown did for sort of Christian mythology, and that way we sort of do for Greek mythology and the transition to Christian mythology. How look, if anyone who celebrates Christmas, that's a pagan holiday that we sort of said is, oh, it's Christian. So there's all these things that you see that sort of came before. And look, I consider myself Christian. We're certainly not trying to make anything that's anti-religious at all.
And I've got to say, reading it, I didn't think this was anti-religious at all. I'm very much I don't know, my view on religion, and I've said recently on a different pod, is that it's each to their own. If someone wants to believe this, fine, believe that. If someone wants to believe something else, hey, you know what? That's totally fine as well. It's not like there's a set of rule books that turns around and says this is the definitive one you should be following. Yeah, and if that's God or gods, or if it's the Force, you know what? It doesn't bother me one little jot, because it's your thing. All right, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think the thing about this, that the thing I was always fascinated, I've always been fascinated by with the history of Christianity, is sort of the seismic shift in the, whether you believe it was a real person or not, the seismic shift in the sort of what came before Christ, which was like eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and what came after Christ was like, hey, if someone hits you in the face,
turn the other cheek.
The face again. It's like, whoa, that's so different and so radically different, that regardless, that idea came into the world through somebody, and it was transformative. And obviously we've seen religion used for great evil and great good, and so it's something that's just fascinating to me to explore, just from even if you don't believe, just from a human level. This virus of this new idea and this new way of thinking that sort of infected the world, and for better or worse,
So, well, obviously Anna had the better idea here, because she's kind of taken this. See what I did there?
Anna always
so
I'm like the biker who's behind the the Lance Armstrong, and I'm just ripping in her wake. It's fine.
Oh, sorry, man. What I liked about the book is, as you said early on, and Anna, build on this by all means. It's that period of transition, isn't it? It's from the old gods, from the Zeus pantheon, to a more centralized one god type of setup. I find that absolutely fascinating, not because of the religious connotations of it all. I just find it fascinating how people have that transitory nature, how they can shift from one thing to another. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a Dolphins fan. I am never going to change allegiance. I don't care. Well, maybe if Tom Brady leaves the Bucs and goes to the Dolphins.
Well, real quick, my niece works for the Bucs, and when she took that job, they were worse than the Dolphins, and I was like, why are you going to that team? And then last time I saw her, I went to a game, and she had a Super Bowl ring about that big. So.
Yeah,
it happened to you, man.
Yeah, no, it won't. I've been following the Finns since '85. It's never going to happen to us, man.
Yeah, I know.
So no, it's that transitory period. I absolutely totally get it. You talk about it coming from the human experience.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's always fascinated me is that moment, right, where Julian is the last pagan emperor, and he doesn't last that long as the pagan emperor, right? There's a couple Christian ones before him, and he's sort of like the last ditch effort to bring paganism back. And I've always been curious as to what happened in that time period to get people to go from polytheism, right, which is open and accepting theoretically, to monotheism, which is very like my team or no team type of thing. And the way that plays out politically, right, as people try to use religion for power. And that to me was the sort of prolonged conversation that we're having in this series, is like, you have people who believe very strongly in what God they believe in, or gods, and then how those perspectives change based on life experiences and how they come to the other side. Because I think that by the end of the series, I think people are going to be really surprised with where we go in this conversation. And again, we're not taking a perspective so much as we are telling a story about how people's views about the world change depending on what ideas they take on.
And that's, you know what, and that comes straight across from the first issue, definitely. I wholeheartedly can see the fact that you are presenting a world and you're presenting characters within that world. And it's up to the reader to buy into what character A feels or character B feels, or so on and so forth. So, you know, I think it's a clever juxtaposition, massively. I think the dialogue works really well. The book looks great. So
thank you.
Thanks
so much.
Cool. And you can see at the bottom of the screen there, you can follow Eternus and the Thunder Comics on Instagram and on Twitter. There you go. Check that out. You can pause it. It's been there a while. Just don't, if you're pausing the video to write it down, don't like do it when my face is a funny looking thing. Thanks. Cheers. Give me some self-esteem. All right. Excellent. The book. Let me give everyone some more deets. The book is in a previews. The code, should you want to go down to your local store, I'm going to give you the code for the cover that we've got as our backdrop in the one we've shown over during the pod, because it's the best cover, basically. Sorry for everybody else. I really do apologize. This is the Rob Pryor cover. So it's June. That's Juliet Uniform November 221872. This is due to hit shops on, I've lost the page, the 3rd of August. All right. So get down to your local comic book shops, get an order put in for this. All right. And have your mind blown. Simple as, right? What could be simpler than that? No?
It's going to happen, whether you want it or not.
I'm going to say, my last couple of questions, I guess. I love Scout Comics. I think Scout Comics are one of those kind of, they're not Dark Horse, they're not Image, but the stuff they put out is such a good quality and it's so diverse. What was it like working with Scout and Thunder Comics?
Yeah, well, Scout published I actually worked with one of the partners at Scout on the second book I did after the Rift, called The Mall, and we became very close. We were talking every day to create that book, and I just saw the growth of what they were doing. And in 2019, they actually invited me to become a part of the company, and so I joined the board.
Hold on, let me just let me write your name down, so when I send the comic strip, I know who to write it to.
That's me, man.
Just message me later. I'll get you his email.
Yeah, we have a great submissions team, and I think part of is creator-based label. So we get books from creators, and I think Scout, we have the best supply chain and distribution in the business. I mean, James, my partner, has created we have a warehouse with 12 full-time employees. Our printer is right next to our facilities. So when COVID hit and everyone else shut down, including Diamond and Marvel and DC, we were still, our printer is a family-run shop. They still were printing. We were still distributing, and Scout actually, if people bought a book and told us what comic shop they normally shopped at, because comic shops were shut down as non-essential, we sent half the money to the comic shop. So we try to keep things running then, and it's a great indie label. There's a lot of great indie labels, but I can't speak for working them in the way that Anna could, but it's a nice partnership too between Thunder and Scout. Thunder creates books with people from the film and entertainment industry, like Andy Serkis. We're doing another book with Joel David Moore from Avatar. That's really great. It's going to be out at San Diego Comic-Con.
Cool.
And so they're like the sort of the Skydance to Scout's Warner Brothers or Paramount.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Excellent. Okay, there you go. And Don, thank you so much for spending the time and talking to us about Eternus. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you for having us. It was wonderful hanging out.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man. Then really appreciate your support of indie comics in general, man. It's great to have
we love indie comics. We love indie comics, absolutely. And I'll speak to you after the pod about something, so you just hang fire there. All right, don't forget to check out the UCPN for all your favorite shows, including You saw the advert earlier. What more do you want? The Old Timers Comic Book Show, the only place to get those books that are at least 25 years old. And of course, if you're more mainstream, don't forget to check out the Definitive Crusade for all your DC books and news. And of course, the No Price Podcast, which keeps you up to date with Marvel, Disney Plus, and the MCU. So you can expect some Obi-Wan, you can expect some Thor, and you can expect some chat about some comic books as well. Thrown in for good measure. Who knows, right? All right. Anna, thank you very much. Don, thank you for making the time. I really do appreciate it. I've been your host, Johnny Machine Hughes. And as always, adios.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.shop, all about comic pop culture.